The things that can go wrong in a package installation and being aware of them and understanding what can be done to avoid it or what can be done to fix it after the fact are both very important parts of installing the package. A queen, if you're installing on package, can never ever be released or get out of her cage on the day that they're installed. It takes about 3 days for the bees to become accustomed to her and to accept her as their queen. And they have to have enough foundation drawn in order to convert it from being just an empty hive into a cluster formation, organize the cluster so that when she gets out, she recognizes it as a suitable hive, a suitable home. And typically about 3 sides, 1.5 frames, 6 8-inch diameter with some liquid stored and comb drawn, ready for her to go to work is enough for her to get out. So what controls whether they can draw comb that fast or not is 1, volume of bees, and 2, volume of food. It takes about 2 quarts of syrup the first 3 days to stimulate enough wax production to draw the comb and get things organized for her to be ready to get out. So you should recognize that it's not all the bee's responsibility. It's partly the beekeeper's responsibility to oversee what's going on. Number 3 is queen painted prior to laying. You never ever paint a queen until she has a couple of frames of eggs. Her acceptance in that hive is tenuous until she's done that. Number 4, if the queen is dead or injured in the queen cage or dies during installation, for example, you go in on the 3rd day to release her and she's dead in the cage, you should leave the cage in the hive and go secure another queen. Your package supplier. Hopefully, if this happens, it's not because you've starved the bees. We did have a guy once that his feeder had not come in that he had ordered, and so he didn't feed his bees when he installed the package. And he couldn't understand why all the bees were dead on the bottom of the bottom board. But the queen cage and the dead queen have enough pheromones to hold the bees there. If there's no brood, even if they've drawn the comb, they're going to start drifting to other hives or leaving because of a high stress situation. Usually a queen can get there fairly quickly. It's much better if you can pick one up right away than have to order one and have it sent. Queen flies away during release. We're going to see a good video on that, aren't we, Anna? We won't even go into that right now, but we can show you how that the queen can never, ever release. Worst case scenario, and you can picture this with a first-time person, is they pull the queen cage out of the frames. They're standing upright. The queen is in their hands 2 feet above the top bars of the brood chamber. And they're just so amazed looking at this queen in the cage that they pull it open and up and gone out the cage, and she's flying. It's possible if you put the lid on the hive and set that cage on top of the lid that she'll be back in 10 minutes. I wouldn't bet money on it, but it is a possibility. Worst case scenario, you close it up and lay the cage and give them a few hours and see if she comes back. The queen in her cage, if she doesn't have workers in the cage with her, and you soak the queen when you're soaking the bees getting ready to install the package, she can't clean herself. And they breathe through spherical openings down their side. And if she gets syrup plugging up those little spherical openings, she's going to suffocate. And this is partly why we use a lot of water and very, very little sugar, because it's mostly a dehydration situation. Number 7 is failing to properly install the queen cage. The screen has to be facing down the frame toward the center of the frame. And there's a picture there on your screen showing that quite often, especially with drawn comb on an existing frames that have had bees, or the size of the cage, how you install it, often those frames will be splayed out. They'll be a lot wider at the bottom than at the top. And the result of that is often building a comb on the bottom of the queen cage and a comb maybe forward, like the picture shows, between the two frames. You've got to realize that the bees have to fill the area between the frames in order to function. And so when it's foundation, it takes a lot of bees in between the frames. And if the frames are splayed out, even with drawn comb, it's still going to take a lot of bees. So getting that queen released and the cage out of there as soon as they're ready to be released is very important. It could give you an extra frame of brood, eggs, larvae, pupa, at a much earlier date and make your hive grow faster. Just imagine if it takes X number of bees and the frames are spread, that when those frames are back in the right position and tight together like they should be, you should have enough bees to cover an extra frame over what it had when the queen cage was in there. The next one is very possible. I've seen it happen. In fact, I took these pictures of one of our club members' hives. He had to be out of the state due to a situation with his mother, and I installed his packages for him up at Ball Ground, and then he came and picked them up when he came back. These bees were shook into the brood frames, and the excluder placed and the jars placed, and they actually came back up and attached to the inner cover. That's just so you won't think that that was staged, making them be up there. And I've had people that called in and said, you know, my queen's dead in her cage and the bees are all up in the top and they've built comb in the top. So if the bees get up there, they just need a little bit of guidance, coaching, in order to fix the situation. And if you check on it an hour after you install the package and just give that lid a little bump, light slam, it'll jar the bees down to the excluder. You see the excluder, and come back another hour later, there'll be probably half that number that there were attached to the inner cover. You can bump it again, but you have to get the bees down to draw comb and to draw useful comb on the frames and not up there on the inner cover. You can't leave a package of bees out in the weather. They generate a lot of heat, and the hotter it is, the more heat they generate and the more hyper they get, and that dehydrates them very fast. Leaving them out in the sun or in a very warm spot as the temperatures continue to warm up as we go through April and into May. A package of bees, for example, in May, they would need to be sprayed down every couple of hours just to keep them from getting dehydrated. On the other hand, getting soaked in the rain is not a good thing for them either, because they can't generate heat and keep the cluster warm. So package bees should be installed ASAP. It's ideal if they're installed in the evening and you can get a little less drift. But being in the package cage, they become stressed and dehydrated, and you can have more bees start dying and dropping to the bottom. The third item on package mishandling is package of bees left out in an open trunk or bed of truck when being transported. Bees go into a coma at 47 degrees. So moving packages of bees when it's in the 40s, the wind chill of driving down the road, they draw their cluster up tight and they can't cover the bottom of the can. And the result is they burn up what's in their stomach trying to keep warm, and they aren't acquiring any more. And so they begin to starve and go into a coma. They can do a pretty good job of keeping warm under normal temperatures and situations with food in their stomach, but when their stomach goes empty, they have no ability to keep warm. And that, is that the last one, Ryan?
Yep.
Okay.
Hey, I wanted to throw in there, BJ, you know, like if someone picks your bees up and you're at work, just have them put them in a cool spot, in a shaded area, not in direct sunlight, and you know, install them as soon as possible. But I normally install my bees of an evening, and if I'm installing packages, and like BJ said, there's less drift and more chance that they're gonna make that their new home and not have any problems.
I did leave out 2 pages looking through these. I don't have them numbered.
I've got it up on the screen, the next page there.
Okay. 1-to-1 is the formula that stimulates wax production the best, and it's probably because it's thinner and it's closer to nectar and the bees are able to relocate it. But having that 1-to-1 stimulates the wax glands to produce wax, and the wax, if you've got enough solid area on the bottom board and not all screen, you will see a lot of little wax flakes when you're feeding them this mixture, or when there's a nectar flow on. They're about the size of what you would consider a louse to be, you know, maybe a 1/16 of an inch, and they are just absolutely white. And I've had people think, oh no, I've got something wrong in my hive, all these little white things down here on the bottom, and it's just wax. But if you have a strong nectar flow, they may be able to draw those 3 sides without feeding them 2 quarts. But to put 2 quarts on there and have the holes large enough they can take it out as fast as they want is very important. On the other hand, if you have a huge hole, it's going to just drain out and run right through the hive and be down on the ground for the skunks and possums and raccoons to dig around in that night. So you want it to create a vacuum, and the problem with this is if your hole is too big and the thinner syrup, it won't hold itself in when the hole is too large. So it doesn't hurt to turn the can over upside down, the hole's down, give it a little shake, and make sure that it drips or splatters out and then stops. I wouldn't shake it on the grass. I'd give it to the bees. Absconding. Putting the excluder underneath the brood chamber is a benefit as far as if your queen gets out too soon, it can keep your bees in there instead of having them leave to go find something that could be a better home than what you've prepared for them. And even if you do everything right, it's possible that the bees could just decide to walk out the door and leave, even with the queen excluder there sometimes. There are some things that contribute to it, and package bees that are shook from the brood frames, it's very possible that this time of the year they could have a young virgin queen in where the hive's hatched a queen. She could be small. She could go through an excluder, and if she goes out the front door, the bees are going to go with her and leave that queen in the cage all by herself in the hive. That's not something you want to happen. A lot of times I've seen a loose queen in a hive, and you can tell it often because the way the bees act and how they hang inside the cage. Shannon's statement at the end of that is, in every package, bees are stressed. Our job as a beekeeper to do what we need to do to de-stress them and provide them with all the tools they need to organize and develop the best nest possible. Don't paint the inside of your hive. I've never known fresh paint to be a problem, but most people paint their equipment weeks ahead, get it built and painted, and they wouldn't even consider painting it the same day that they're going to install the package. That's a possible problem. There's been a lot of studies done on rough interior of the hive being beneficial for more propolis and less fungus and disease problems. Propolis is very beneficial for the bee's immune system. Bees don't like your weed eater, and they will often let you know how little they like your weed eater. But if you can do your mowing early in the morning before the bees get very active, and blow your exhaust and grass away from the hives and not toward it, you will get by without the bees harassing you too much, as long as you don't run into the hives and jar them, knock them.
Can I throw in an observation on the
weed eat wearing cutoffs and no veil and no gloves, and there's other times that I started that way and ended up going and put on full coveralls to be able to weed eat around the bees.
I'll throw an observation if I can.
What's that?
Observation with the weed eaters with my bees. I got one of those new electric weed eaters, battery powered. It doesn't seem to bother the bees near as much as the gas powered one.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Just a little observation that may help.
And those 40 and 80 volt electric equipment are becoming far more available and less pricey. One of my neighbors years ago, he picked up a swarm of bees off a bush at work, stuffed them in a cardboard box, and took them home. He'd always wanted to have a hive of bees, and he's just down the road a little ways from Ryan. And he swore that almost every bee in that box stung him when he dumped them in the hive. He did not know that you could spray them down and you could dump them just like a package of dried beans. When I really got to questioning him, and this was years and years ago, yeah, he probably got stung 7 or 8 times, but in his mind, that was every single bee in that whole box. So perception comes into play there. When you have bees flying around your face and your head and stinging you, the perception is it's a whole lot of them. You never use a smoker during package installation. A smoker tells them to move away from where you're smoking them. And when you're smoking in the hive, you've just opened a hive, you're telling them to calm down, and you watch them as you smoke, and they go back down in the frames and everything's calmer. Well, there is no brood to hold them in the hive when it's a package. There is no magnet holding them. And so basically they will just evacuate out of that box very quickly if they have the ability to do it. Keep yourself, your family, and your pets safe. If you have a brother-in-law that you just as soon didn't come visit you again, you be sure to invite him to help you. But on the other hand, if it's your sister and you love her dearly, you give her your jacket and veil and gloves so that she can stand there and watch you and feel very safe and protected. Drifting is an issue, and Ryan has covered that at different times with the club. And setting something in front of your hive so that they have to go around it in order to get out and fly tells them to take new bearings as far as their entrance, and it can help. Quite often, your bees are very, very flight oriented from the yards that they came from. And so if there's a row of 10 hives and they came from the end hive, they fly out. If they don't get new bearings, they're going to try to go to a hive that's at the same end relative to the sun's direction that they were in previously. That's a very, very strong orientation. And the amazing thing is their orientation allows for the change of the sun and its move across the sky as they communicate nectar sources and everything else.
With that said, BJ, I wanted to throw in there that one thing that I always do during my package installations that helps reduce the drifting is to always lean something up against the hive, whether it be an extra external lid or an inner cover or something that you can leave for a couple days, a scrap piece of plywood, just to make sure that the bees reorient before they get out of the hive and come back to the wrong one.
Have you ever had any bees drift, Ryan?
Yes, I have, and that's how I learned that lesson the hard way.
I was once installing packages at a new yard, and there were 30, 40 packages, and the wind was gusting up to 35 mile an hour. And so the bees would fly out and the wind would take them away, and they would come back in close to the ground or close to trees that would shelter them. But the hives that they approached first coming up, it took 2 supers on top of the brood chamber to hold them. And the hives at the other end of the yard did not have enough bees to take care of the queen, is how extreme it was. So these are just little things. If the temperature is 48, 49 degrees, the bees don't want to fly very much. It's a very good time to install packages as long as it's not super windy or the snow blowing. So, any questions on the problems that could possibly arise?
I do want to throw in there, I've had several new beekeepers that was installing packages before tell me that they like to go in their bees every couple days. And I would highly recommend against that until the bees get settled and get some brood and, the queen gets a pattern. It's one of those disturbances that can run them away because they don't feel comfortable with you being in there when they don't have any magnet, like BJ mentioned, to hold them there.
And if you have other hives and you have a package that has a dead queen, putting a frame of brood in there, open brood, eggs and larvae, gives them that magnet to hold them there to stay in the cluster so they don't keep losing bees over the next few days. Okay.